Dr. Fauci, as you know, there are still questions that remain as to the origin of COVID. The U.S. Department of Energy, about 2 weeks ago, put out an assessment saying that they have, with low confidence, that there's a possibility that this emerged from a lab. Right now, where do you think COVID came from?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we don't know. And I think that's where a lot of the accusations and confusion about who says what. We don't know the definitive answer to that. Obviously, there are two possibilities that are being entertained, and I think we need to keep a completely open mind until we have definitive proof. However, having said that, if you look at the information, because something might be possible one or the other, that doesn't mean one is more probable than the other. And if you look historically, as well as information that has recently been published by a considerably large group of highly respected international evolutionary virologists, although it isn't definitive, they published in the peer-reviewed literature, when you look at epidemiological, virological, and geospatial information from Wuhan, they feel, and have published this, that it is more likely, not definitive, but more likely that it's a natural occurrence from an animal reservoir to a human. Having said that, since it isn't definitive, all of us must keep a completely open mind that it could be one or the other. So rather than fighting about it, we should try and absolutely find out which it is. But in the meantime, do whatever you can to prevent either option from happening again.
A whistleblower has just exposed the truth about the biggest cover-up in history. And thankfully, we got people in our government who are paying attention. So a new opinion piece from Senator Rand Paul shows that leaked information has shown that multiple federal agencies were aware of the research that scientists in Wuhan were doing. The research was put in place to try and create a virus that would have looked very similar to the one that stopped all of our lives just a few years ago. The discovery is startling, as there are still many questions that you and I don't know the answer to. The pandemic is also being blamed by multiple experts as the start of high inflation, of millions of Americans losing jobs, and both small and big businesses closing. The senator is seemingly trying his best to get to the bottom of all of this, but it seems like he's getting pushback, which is why he says it might be best if Trump wins this year so that we would finally know the truth. And hey guys, before we really get into this, all I ask is that you take 1 second, hit the like button for the video, and I want to thank you so much for always sharing these videos on Facebook and Twitter. I really appreciate you guys. The question is, will Donald Trump send Anthony Fauci to jail, along with everyone who may have been involved with this cover-up?
We've known, of course, that EcoHealth Alliance had pitched the DEFUSE project to, I believe, the Defense Department, did not procure funding for that project, although, whether that research was going on or had gone on anyway or continued is an open question. But now you're saying that it's far from this lone agency that knew about this project. Who else in the government knew that scientists were trying to get government funding to make a virus that would have looked like COVID?
And it's important to know that we only know anything about this because of a whistleblower. So in 2021, a Lieutenant Colonel, Marine, Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Murphy at DARPA came forward, and he said he'd been looking for research like this because he was convinced that it was going on. He went to a folder, a computer folder, and he looked for this, and it wasn't there. Then he saw another exchange between myself and Fauci, and he saw the tension heating up, and he went back to the folder and looked, and all of a sudden the document was there. And the document indicated that Wuhan lab was working with UNC, Ralph Barrick, and with Peter Daszak at EcoHealth, and that a proposal was to take a coronavirus, which is not very infectious in humans usually, and make it more infectious in humans by putting a special cleavage site called the furin cleavage site in.
Are you surprised at all? There's a lot to take in here, but let's start back in 2018. There were at least 15 federal agencies that were briefed on a project proposed by Peter Daszak and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, as you heard, this was the DEFUSE project, and its goal was to make a novel chimeric virus, one that is very similar to what you and I know as the C-19 virus. Is this a coincidence? Senator Rand Paul thinks that it's not. Because again, this was back in 2018, just 2 years prior to the pandemic. Now, we can say that all 15 federal agencies were not necessarily aware of the danger that was being pitched back then, but Paul says that it's weird that not a single one of them warned anyone about these plans. He adds that there should have been a public warning if these agencies thought that the virus could be made, because the senator says that there's a huge difference when it comes to a virus that comes from a lab and one that comes straight from an animal. The viruses that are created in labs are pre-adapted to infect humans, which could explain how the C-19 virus spread so rapidly across the globe within just a short amount of time. If the virus came from an animal, then it would have been a lot more challenging for it to be transmitted directly to humans. It's not impossible, but it's not built to infect us easily. It's also been revealed that Fauci was aware of this because of the involvement of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. As it turns out, the NIAID was listed as the participant in the initial DEFUSE pitch. Besides the Wuhan Institute of Virology, Fauci's Rocky Mountain Lab was also named as a partner. There's also a name that Paul singled out: Ian Limpkin, a scientist whose lab supposedly received millions of dollars from EcoHealth. He was a part of the initial plan to create the chimeric coronaviruses. He was also one of the authors of Proximal Origins, a journal paper commissioned by Fauci himself to discredit anyone who could say that the virus came from a lab. Is that a coincidence? Now again, Rand Paul says that that's probably not the case. These events were taking place one after another by design. He then went on to say that there are probably hundreds of people within our government that are aware of this plan to create this virus, yet none of them stood up for the American people or for anyone in the world. The past few years have been some of the worst for many of us, and while it would be great to have some closure to the story, it sadly won't bring anyone back. Now, Senator Paul has confirmed that he doesn't have the power to subpoena at this moment, as they don't hold the majority of the Senate. It would probably be helpful to get more information, since most of the paperwork involved in this situation has been redacted. There's even one paper that's supposed to be from the NIH and is about the briefing of Dr. Anthony Fauci regarding the coronavirus. The problem is that it's completely redacted. There's not a shred of information that can be taken from it. Besides the NIA and the NIAID, Paul says the representatives from the Army, Navy, labs, USAID, and even the CDC are privy to this information. He adds that it would be best for them to retake the Senate and the White House so that they can get to the bottom of all of this. He believes that former President Donald Trump is the man who will actually help these investigations rather than hide them from the public. And just to add a little bit of fuel to the raging fire here, a new report was previously hidden by the CDC shows that there were a lot of complications for many people who received the C-19 vaccine. Now, you remember when these things were introduced, everyone was expected to get it. But now, data's come out that shows that there were 780,000 reports of adverse side effects that were not released to the public initially. The injury reports were made through the vSafe text message system designed by the CDC. The injuries ranged anywhere from paralysis, heart inflammation, seizures, miscarriages, and allergic reactions. Now, many are still wary that they've taken this drug. And while we do have a right to do what we want with our bodies, it's still alarming to know that these reports are just now coming out. But what do you guys think? Should Anthony Fauci be held accountable for these alleged involvements in this entire thing? Should the American people be made more aware of who was behind all of this? Well, as far as I know, I'll do my best to keep you guys informed on everything that's going on. Before I go, I want to thank you all for hanging out. Thank you for liking and sharing this video. I'll see you on the next one.